Alright, Victorum Gaming fans and Hail Caesar fans, we're back with another in our series covering the different factions of the game. And in our previous video, we covered the Hoplite Greek list. So today we're moving on to the Samnites, and again, it's another one of those basically roughly 5th through 3rd century BC lists. If you don't know who the Samnites were, definitely worth checking out. Basically, these guys gave Rome a run for their money for a while, but then eventually kind of fell underneath the might of Rome, but still nonetheless really cool faction with some really cool history. You know, they got a pretty solid little army here in Hail Caesar, and it would be interesting down the road if they get like a sort of a warband type of list for SPQR, which is also from Warlord. But again, if you're not familiar with the Samnites, there's a couple actually really good documentaries out on like YouTube and stuff like that, so check it out. Just, you know, search for like the Samnite Wars or the Samnites themselves, and you'll get some good information. But anyway, and even though you know, this is a Warlord game, I will give a quick shout out to Victrix Miniatures, because they actually do produce a line of really awesome plastic Samnites, so definitely check that out if you're thinking of building Samnites. Anyway, moving on to the army list. So cavalry here, this is an interesting list too. Lots of different things going on here. So, but cavalry can be up to a quarter of the army. And then Samnite or Lucanian light cavalry has to be 50% of that cavalry. And then still, infantry is going to be, again, primarily infantry-based list, but 75% of the army does have to be infantry. And again, we're not counting skirmishers. And then an interesting little bit here, because they're not really skirmishers, but just light infantry. So Samnite light infantry has to be a quarter of your actual infantry. So, and again, not counting skirmishers. And then the usual division and skirmisher breakdowns, as we pretty much see with every list. So, that being said, as we just take a quick pan down here, you can see there's actually a hell of a lot of stuff going on with the Samnites, which, you know, again, if you haven't heard of the faction and, you know, they're not necessarily that important in history, that well remembered, but this is actually a pretty diverse list, so there's definitely a lot to unpack here. So we're just going to get through it, and then we'll stop along the way as we uncover some interesting points here. So, Samnite medium infantry armed with spears, and again, that kind of roughly typical medium infantry profile, 6s for clash and sustain, a little bit of short range ability, the average morale save there, and 23 points unit. And interestingly, kind of like the Roman influence here, you can give Samnite infantry Pila, which adds that special rule for them as far as the equipment goes, but only up to half of those units, but it does cost you 3 points per unit, although that can definitely create some interesting dynamics there. And, you know, people expecting just another kind of like generic medium infantry unit might be surprised when they run into the Pila, or your Pila armed medium infantry here. Then you have what's called the Samnite Linen Legion Medium Infantry. So it's kind of cool here. So these guys are stubborn, and basically you have access to plenty of stubborn units here. So that's actually pretty dang neat. Stats are the same as the other medium infantry above. These guys clocking at 25 points a unit. And again, you could upgrade these guys to be wielding Pila as well for another 3 points. So brings them to 28, which is getting a little expensive, but might be worth it for a unit or two here. But again, just having sort of stubborn on tap is pretty cool. And then you have a similar version of these guys, but the Linen Legion Heavy Infantry, and again a similar upgrade to Pila, so you can kind of go from like medium to stubborn medium, and then heavy stubborn, and then again these guys have that increase in fight value here, going to 7s, which brings them in line with like hoplites and stuff like that, and Romans, which we'll see when we eventually start covering the Roman lists. And then a 4-up morale save, so pretty good for, again, the heavy infantry profile, and again more access to stubborn, but again the points reflect that. So these guys clock in at base 29 points, which is 1 point more than the upgraded unit above with Pila. And then again, you can give these guys Pila, but now we're getting into the 30s on points there. So, but again, basically you have access to a good chunk of your infantry, and again, your infantry is 75% of your whole list here, of stubborn units across the board. That will be something that you don't really see all that often, and could, again, in the right hands, give an opposing player some fits here. Then we have what's called Oscan medium infantry with just Pila, and that's basically it. And it's kind of interesting that these guys are only 26 points, and you know, yeah, just Pila, no stubborn or anything like that. So, and you know, Stat-wise and rules-wise, they're 26 points, which is the same as the Samnite with Pila. So, not really sure why you would want to necessarily field that particular unit. There's nothing to really differentiate them unless I'm missing something, but I don't think I am. You can also take Oscan or Companion Heavy Infantry. So again, just more heavy infantry. But the cool thing here is these guys are hoplites with long spears, but you only get one unit of them, so you might as well take them. But again, brings you some more of that heavy infantry goodness as far as stats. But these guys also have phalanx, and they clock in at the 32 points for the unit. But again, just having a phalanx type unit in the list is kind of cool too. Just a really strong defensive unit, can do a lot of work. And then again, pairing that with all the stubborn that you have access to is pretty cool. You also have a Lucanian heavy infantry with long spears fielded as a small unit. These guys are also essentially hoplites. Phalanx rule here. Only 23 points a unit, which is kind of a bit much for like a small unit, but still 5s for clash and sustained, and an actual 4-up morale save. So you a small unit of heavy infantry basically. So again, unlike a lot of the other small units that you're probably going to face, because you really don't see small units of heavy infantry, at least we haven't yet. So these guys can kind of hang with some of these other similar small units of like light and medium infantry, and the clash and sustain values will be similar, but that better morale save could, along with phalanx, could really like make them more durable and maybe punch through some of those type of units. And then we get into some of the light infantry. So we have Samnite light infantry armed with javelins. So again, okay stats here as far as fighting, but again, don't expect too much out of your light infantry, because again, they might have the same clash and sustain as that Lucanian infantry above, but when we get to morale save, that's where you see the difference there, just that 6-up. And again, these guys start at 20 points a unit, and then we have several upgrades, so we can make them drilled. So again, we kind of have lots of access to very special rules in this list. But drilled brings us to 3 points a unit, and then we can make them elite as well for another 6 points a unit, which is getting a bit expensive for light infantry units. And one more, basically we can also add tough fighters for 1 point. The elite upgrade is definitely expensive, but for 1 point, why would you not go with tough fighters, I guess? But the stats don't change, so again, this is kind of it's really good stuff here, but could also see this as kind of a trap, because the temptation, of course, is there's no restriction. This isn't just for one unit or anything, so the temptation is going to be like, oh well, I'm going to upgrade all my units, which is cool, but you're going to have a lot of expensive units that are at the end of the day kind of also still just light infantry, so that they're going to start accumulating casualties pretty quick. But that being said, having drilled elite and tough fighters is definitely kind of cool for a light infantry unit. It's just, again, that morale save isn't going to do them any favors. So, but definitely like dealing with some of the lighter things, probably putting these guys towards the flanks, and just dealing with some of the lighter, weaker things. They'll be similar in stats, but just clearly superior on like these extra special rules, so that could give them, or should give them, the advantage. But again, just are you willing to pay the upgrade costs and all that? So moving on, we jump into our skirmishers, and that's like a big chunk of this list here. So we have skirmishers with javelins as small units, and again, the typical stats you might expect, and very cheap, 11 points. And then we have some very interesting other skirmish options here, basically. So peasant skirmishers armed with bows and fielded as a small unit, so just one unit of them, but that does give you a little bit of long range in this otherwise basically no long range list here. They're levies, and just for 10 points. Considering you just get the one unit, you might as well just to have some actual long range shooting. And then similarly, a sling unit with just one unit, also 10 points. Again, these are the only 2 long range units you get in the whole list. You might as well take the 1 unit of each. 20 points total for 2 units. That's negligible. Really no reason not to take them. And then we jump into the cavalry, and they have some interesting options here. So we have Samnite or Lucanian light cavalry armed with javelins as small units, and again, not a specific restriction on them, just those army restrictions above, but that okay clash value for, again, a small unit of light cavalry. But again, they're not going to stick around long, so again, you got to really pick your fights. They do have feigned flight for 19 points, so not terrible there. Then we have Tarentine or Apulian light cavalry armed with javelins as small units, and again, basically this same stats. However, these guys are elite for also 19 points. And we could upgrade them so to make them stubborn. So again, no stat changes, but elite stubborn for 20 points and that one small unit. Might as well go for it. It's pretty cool. And then we get into the Campanian light cavalry armed with javelins, again as small units. So you can kind of notice the theme here. Lots of light, little harassing cavalry. Again, they can punch a little bit, but they're not going to stick around very long. But these guys are elite, and then they have feigned flight as well for 21 points. So some interesting combinations of special rules here, basically. So again, still light cavalry at the end of the day. They're just there to harass and maybe do a little bit of fighting. They're not going to stick around long if they run into some serious opposition. But at the end of the day, still kind of an elite, not to focus on the keyword here, but just kind of like elite as far as special rules go. So they're a cut above a lot of the other type of light cavalry small units that we've been seeing across a lot of these lists, where they're just fairly generic. Here you have, again, some of these special rules which can help you out in the right circumstances. And finally, one last unit, and that is the Apulian medium cavalry with spears, fielded as a small unit. So these guys similarly can do a little bit of harassing, but important to note here that they have a clash of 6, so they can definitely have a little bit more impact if they get that charge off or the first round of combat. But again, they're going to fade fairly quickly, although they do have that slightly better morale save of 5 up, which does make a difference. It might not seem like much, but unfortunately, these guys don't come with any kind of special rules, which would have really, I think, put them into some interesting territory there, just as far as abilities. But again, it's a small unit, so you can't expect too much out of it. But just some interesting little options that they have towards the cavalry side of things. But again, I think overall your bread and butter is going to be across your infantry. And then last but not least, before we kind of review things here in general, and again, just leadership 8 across the board, nothing special, no upgrades. So definitely, considering just the sheer diversity here, you definitely want at least leadership 8. This would be really, I think, rough if we had to command all kinds of different things like this with leadership 7. But fortunately, 8 is great, as we kind of see that with just about every army. But as we saw again in the description up above, so again, cavalry can be up to 25%. So make some use of this kind of like pseudo elite light cavalry and kind of focus in on what they will do best. But again, they're no substitute for like medium, like solid medium combat cavalry or heavy kind of shock cavalry. That's not what these things are. So just keep that in mind. And again, these are all small unit cavalry. So really, again, your bread and butter is going to be across this very solid medium infantry that you have with decent heavy infantry, and then a kind of, again, sort of elite core of light infantry with lots of interesting options, and just a pretty good array of skirmishers. Again, some weaknesses in the list though. Cavalry is really going to be your only mobility. So there's no chariots here. There's no other, again, just like normal unit size cavalry, so there's only so much speed that you're really going to get out of the army as far as that kind of aspect goes. But pretty much everything in this list has got some form of javelin, and you do have a lack of long range for the list. We've got to point that out again. So you have one unit, if you take it, and that you really should be taking it, one unit of bows and one unit of slingers. And they're both just small units, so you're only going to get those 2s there for the long-range shots. So, don't expect too much long-range firepower. Definitely maybe get a few casualties in on whatever's coming close to you, but you're not going to shoot somebody full of holes from long range and have them soften up by the time close combat is getting ready here. So, again, this is going to be a almost Roman-like list, and again, considering their proximity in history, probably not an accident here. So, but again, they're not going to be as elite as Rome across the boards. These guys are not legionaries here, although you do have some, again, pretty close approximations here with, again, that medium to heavy infantry that you have, and again, just interesting access to just a whole lot of special rules. in quantity across the board here. So it'll definitely be an interesting army to collect and actually bring out onto the tabletop. And overall, again, considering infantry's got to be at least 75% of your list, so obviously it's going to be mainly focused on that. But again, I would probably make some use of the cavalry here just to, if nothing else, screen your army, do a little bit of harassment, and maybe, again, sort of like give the enemy something to think about. And maybe, with the right orders, you can get to their rear and threaten them in various ways that just kind of breaks up their battle lines and gets you in the best possible position to do work with your again, your various medium and heavy infantries here, and certainly backed up by some competent light infantry as well. So overall, it'll be an interesting list. Again, on paper, at least, looks fairly durable, just with the sheer amount of special rules that you have access to. But it'll be one to really get some practice with, and again, face some contemporary opponents and really see like what it can do on the tabletop. So definitely would be interesting to hear from you guys if you collect Samnites and have played it in Hail Caesar, and see what your thoughts are and how they perform for you. Definitely, again, historically, playing against like a Roman list, which we'll probably get into here pretty soon. I think there's one coming up in the order that we're going, but definitely a tough test for them. And even again, like the hoplite Greek list that we looked at would be a pretty rough matchup for these guys, at least on paper. Again, it all comes down to the orders, the general, the dice rolls, and terrain and everything else. But nonetheless, pretty cool list. One of the lesser played ones probably overall, but again, to plug Victrix, they do have, again, I think a pretty full range of plastic models for these guys. So it's actually not very difficult at all to get actual Samnite models, as opposed to having to like kit bash them from Roman, Greek, and whatever else is out there. So definitely one to try. So I think everyone would probably have some fun playing these guys, and again, a little bit of research on like what they kind of looked like historically would be cool too. So you definitely have some painting and hobby options as well. So hope you guys enjoyed this little tour of the Samnite list here, and if you could, give us a like and a subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned for more.